in the last few people here.
Okay.
Here we go.
Good.
They'll be right here.
Everybody.
Good morning, Bente. Yeah, that I think we would have to go with some delusional cheetahs though on that murder, at least. So are we good, Francesca, or who's ever letting people in? Ready? Good to start?
Nobody's
Okay,
waiting.
thank you.
I just muted Corey
Thank
by
you.
mistake.
Good morning to everybody. I'm really glad to see you again, and happy Easter to everyone too. Seems like kind of an auspicious day to be talking about causation. I was a little worried you would all be like, oh no, we have the unfun teacher now. So that is just to say we had a really great day yesterday. And I think, Bante, thank you for throwing like that Rupa party. That took a lot of work. And I feel like, you know, we all absorbed a lot of information in a very fun way. It was really cool. So once again, I do apologize to the Peacock team for taking so long to catch on there. But it was really fun, and we really did get a lot of information. So yeah, I don't want to like land with a thud, but you know, we're here in a very profound, deep teaching today on dependent origination and causation. And you know, it's a really hard teaching to talk about, but of course we will all day. And I do feel like this teaching of today kind of gives me the most buoyancy in my study. Every time I work with this just like keeps things moving and keeps things kind of floating. So I hope we'll have some fun with it. But it's not as much fun as Quizlet, that is for sure. Yeah, so let's launch on in. I have a couple of quotes to start, and the first one is from Charlie Pokorny, who is a Zen priest in California, and he says, "To exist is to cause and be caused, period." 8 words, the whole day, the whole teaching. So just remember that, and you'll have the whole thing. And the other quote is from the suttas, and I'm sure you've heard it, but whoever sees dependent co-arising sees the Dhamma. Whoever sees the Dhamma sees dependent co-arising. That's how central and profound and core this is. Every teaching kind of branches off of this, but you have this vocabulary now. You have this vocabulary, the chitas and the chaitasikas and the rupa. And this is kind of today's like kind of the gears of how all this works. And you're getting another level of the interactivity of all of it. And the more causation is understood weirdly, the more the self dissolves and the more intention does take hold. You would think, well, with the self-dissolving, intention doesn't take hold because we think of intention as part of the self, but actually if intention is about setting up conditions instead of trying to set up states, then this is where intention gets its greatest foothold, is in understanding causation and how conditions lead to each other. And I think it's a good shift of emphasis there. Also, as you might have read in Nina Van Gorkum's introduction, this was a point of enlightenment for Buddha when Buddha burst into these rays of 6 colors from every pore of his body, which the 32 marks was really interesting. I never went through them so thoroughly, but thinking of them yesterday in terms of Rupa and reality, and what if you actually saw a person that looked like that? I don't know, that was really interesting. But what if you actually saw a person with 6 rays of colors coming out of every pore of their body? That's what happened when the 24 modes of causality were being awoken in Buddha's mind. And the colors, according to Nina Van Gorkum, and if you memorize anything, I think this is the coolest list of all. The colors were indigo, golden, red, white, tawny, and dazzling. Now, exactly what they mean by tawny and dazzling, I'm not sure, but that's, just imagine that pouring out of someone. And that's what happened when this was cracked open in Buddha's conception. So in the Sangaha, the compendium of conditionalities, where we are, and it's twofold. There's first the method of dependent arising and then the method of conditional relations. So we'll probably do kind of one. Oh, thank you, Corey. That's the color of tawny. Yeah, my kids had a book called Scrawny Tawny Lion when they were little, one of those golden books. I had a feeling it was kind of lion related.
Yep.
Yeah, and dazzling.
That book, yeah.
Yeah, real good one. Yeah, and dazzling is glitter. Yeah, exactly. So you just like, it's so beautiful to imagine that. So keep that list. That's one of my favorites. Okay, so that there's dependent arising and then conditional relations, which will kind of be the morning, the afternoon, probably. Dependent arising is just this simple happening of a state in dependence on some other state. And then the conditional relations is about the specific causal efficacy of the conditions. And there I'm kind of quoting from the CMA there. But ultimately, reality kind of needs both of these. The first is that stepwise, this leads to that, leads to that. And the second is kind of like about the glue of like, how many ways can this and that mesh together and affect each other? But simple happening doesn't mean it's simple. It just means that the mere occurrence of this is all this needs to happen. Well, it's not all it needs, but that's what happens. This happens because of the mere occurrence. It's really straightforward and it's ridiculously complicated at the same time. But you've heard this a million times, I'm sure. When this exists, this comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. But as we all know from regular life, there's no one cause of anything. But there is this simple line of causation that happens between zillions of things all the time. There's a great quote in the Visuddhimagga about this: because particular states are produced by particular conditions, neither less nor more, it is called reality. And in parentheses, suchness. I think that's very helpful because suchness is one of those words that you come across and you're like, what are they meaning? And the fact, and reality is in, what do you call that? Italics, even in the Visuddhimagga. But to be so basic, because it's just this relates to this, not more, not less. That's what we call reality. That's a pretty heavy duty thought there. So I want to start with the 12 classical links of dependent origination, which are the rim of the wheel of life and death. Inside that are the 6 realms. Inside that, often neglected, is an ascending and descending little ring. And then inside that is the hub, your roots. But these 12 links are kind of a classical explanation. I know you've seen it a bunch of times and it's in a million suttas, but it's incredibly important. And we're going to take 3 spins through the wheel, 2 forward, 1 back. So the first one, I want to take a technical look. I'm going to do this mostly in English and mostly in the translations from the Comprehensive Manual of Abhidhamma by Bhikkhu Bodhi. But we'll work later on the Pali. I'm sure Bhante can help us with that. But just to understand it, we're going to start with English. The first spin is going to be technical. I want to take that vocabulary you have and put it to the wheel, because it really is going to start meshing up in your mind now. It's going to, I mean, meshing, not messing. the cogs of, the kind of gear works of the Abhidhamma are in here. So I want you to really understand a little bit in terms of the Chitta and the Chaitasika that and the Rupa, it's all in there. So we're going to take like a technical thing with those terminologies. And then we're going to go through it again in terms that are more psychological and more about why these links of dependent co-arising explain exactly what it is to be human, what it is to exist in this human realm. They really do give us so much help with that. And we need help. The older I get, the more I realize how really weird and amazing it is to be in the human realm. And that this is in context more for me. It's not an assumption. There are all these other realms we could be in, all these other realms to exist in, but we landed here in this realm, which is so particular and so complicated. And we make it so much more complicated. And it's really hard a lot. It's hard to feel successful, I feel, within the human realm. And I don't mean successful at the stuff you do or your jobs or whatever. I know you're all really successful in a lot of domains. I know that just from hanging out with you for a few weeks. But what I mean is to be successful at being human is really hard, to kind of make the most of this realm, to use this realm to turn the wheel and to kind of go through your day with an awareness that what you're doing makes sense according to what matters to you and according to what helps sentient beings and helps move consciousness in a more unobstructed way. To actually be successful, that's really hard, I think. And I'm more and more aware of that. So that's the second spin of the wheel. We're going to look at how that can help inform us. And then we're going to go backwards and look at, I think it's very important to remember that there's causation and there's also letting go and undoing. So we'll do that. Okay, so I'm gonna, am I good for sharing screen? Who's ever in charge there? Thank you. Okay. Sorry about you guys living through all my stuff here, but this is what I want to give you. Move this up a little. Hold on, sorry. It's the first share of the day. All right. If I make it bigger, then I get it off the screen. Are you seeing this okay? Not so much. How's that? Ish? Okay. All right. Well, it's not super important, but it's a kind of a lopsided wheel where I just have the terms. So we're starting here at ignorance and we're going to zoop around this way because that's just the way I'm kind of used to it in the teachings I've had. Okay. And Venerable reminded me how, so I can see you while you're looking at that. Okay, so we're going to start with kind of technical. Now, ignorance, does anybody remember where ignorance would be in our technical vocabulary? Dig back to your Chaitasika day. It is just the Chaitasika itself, okay? Now, ignorance, just to say, is not without cause. It's not where we start because it's just there. Its causes in the wheel too, but it's just where we start because it's kind of logical. The Visuddhimagga says it's not the root cause, but it's made to serve as a starting point in an exposition of the round of becoming. Okay, so we have the Chaitasika of ignorance, and in this case, technically it's defined as you don't know the Four Noble Truths. You don't know that there was a past before you were born. You don't know that there's a future after you die. And you don't know that the past and future are really together, which is an interesting one. And you don't understand dependent arising. Those are the 8 characteristics of ignorance that are technically what that means on the wheel, classically and technically, which is kind of like saying the first 4 are, we don't know the noble truths, but the last four are kind of like saying you don't realize you're in the human realm. You don't know there was a world before you and after you, and that time is just your thing that you made up and that everything's moving together. You don't get that. And that makes you ignorant. That makes us all ignorant because we all don't get that on some level. We get it in our heads, but there's a lot of levels we don't get that. So due to this ignorance, dependent on this ignorance, arises karmic formations. Technically, what that means, does anybody think they could know where the karmic formations are in our vocabulary of chitta? No, it's actually our vocabulary of chitta and cetasika together. There's a clue. Anybody want to throw that?
Volition.
Thank you. Yes, thanks, Lisa. Yes, it is the 29 volitions that are associated with karma of wholesome and unwholesome chittas. So these volitions are going to influence the future, and they come out of this ignorance. I'm going to say the 29, they're in the 12, just to remind you, the 12 unwholesome chittas, the 8 wholesome beautifuls, the 5 fine material or jhana level ones, and the 4 immaterial. And they're not in the supramundane chittas because those ones, remember, are not involved in this karma and volition, this level of volition. They have a level of volition, but not karma bound. So I don't expect you to know that. I couldn't dig that up out of my head right now. It's written down. Anyways, those are your 29 volitions that come out of ignorance. Now, dependent on those karmic formations arises consciousness. Okay, so that volition conditions the arising of 32 kinds of resultant chittas. Okay, so I'm going to drag you through this. The 32 are the 7 rootless, unwholesome resultants, the 8 beautiful resultants, the 4 resultant, 5 resultant fine material, 4 resultant immaterial. So remember, then in the 5 jhanas, there were 5 of them that were resultant, and in the immaterial meditations, 4 of them were resultant. And then in the 8 supermundane resultants, because they are resultants of karma. They don't produce karma, the supermundane ones. And that 8, I'm saying instead of 40, because in this case, we're using the 89 instead of the 121. I always do this real technical stuff first to get it over with. Then we're going to have fun. Okay, so that's your 32 kinds of resultant chittas. They come from these karmic volitions. Now, dependent on these consciousness states arises nama rupa. Now we were talking about rupa. You can't really separate out rupa. You need to understand all those processes and talk about them, but nama rupa is mentality and materiality together. In a 5-khanda being, which we are, the human realm again, the mind is the cetasikas with the resultant chittas, and matter is the material phenomena produced by karma, like we heard about yesterday, mixed in there. And this all comes of consciousness, because as we were talking about the relationship with consciousness and cetasika, they arise together, but the chitta is considered the forerunner of the process. The chitta is kind of like the chief of it, the leader. So based on that, all this other stuff associated arises. But there's a mutuality condition here. And I'm jumping ahead to the afternoon, but this is very important here. In the 24 modes of conditionality, one of them is called mutuality. And it's real interesting. It's where things condition each other absolutely reciprocally. They like lean on each other. There's an image of sheaths of wheat leaning on each other in a bundle, and you pull out one and the whole thing falls. In a mutuality condition, the influence is going circularly, both directions, back and forth. And we're going to talk about that more when we get to the next round here. But in this last step, it's kind of a mutuality thing with the consciousness and the nama rupa. And it's called the hidden vortex of the wheel. So here's, you got this wheel going around, but there's also a loop in the wheel. If you think of like one of those really deadly roller coasters, it's like that, you know, where you go around, but then there's a loop in it. That's right in there. There's this little loop of causation. We're going to come back to that, but it's real important. Okay, so we're rolling back on. We're of the you got the consciousness. Now we're kind of coming up in your picture there. Dependent on nama rupa arise the 6 sense bases. Now this, you know about those 6 sense bases because that was in that 5, 12, and 18. Remember that a little bit? Anybody? Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the 12 were your bases, the material, fine, sensitive components that are necessary for creating these sense impressions. And that comes out of nama rupa. So it's the 5 sensitive matter bases plus the mind for the 32 resultant chittas as the mind for the mind. Okay, sorry, let me back up. It's the 5 sensitive matter bases plus the 32 resultant chittas as the mind base. So all the bases of our processing come out of nama rupa. And then out of the 6 sense bases, dependent on the 6 sense bases, is contact. So contact is the meeting that we talked about with that 5, 12, and 18. Now we're adding in the field. Contact is the meeting of the chitta, the cetasika, and the object. Okay, so you've got your chitta and your cetasika and the object meet in a field. And so contact is one of the 22 resultant chittas. It's the 32 minus the 10 sense resultant chittas because they're those very weak minimal ones. So contact arises because we have these namarupa potentialities for interacting with things that are going on in the world. Okay. Then, dependent on contact, arises feeling. So basic, again, like that whole day we talked about feeling, or that whole afternoon. The first thing that happens when everything meets in that quick of that meeting is a particular affective tone is set, you know, and it's 6 types. In the technical terms, it can be positive, negative, or neutral, and it can be bodily or mental. So you have 6 types of affective response, immediate with contact. And you know that because it is a universal cetasika, right? So you know it's automatically there. Just like we went through that volition thing, now this is the feeling is automatically there. And dependent on feeling, now we're going to start getting in trouble in samsara. Because dependent on feeling arises craving. In the classical description here, it's for 6 types of objects that correspond to the 6 senses. So remember, we have our 5 regular descriptive senses plus mind as a sense. So we crave those 6 types of objects, and this craving is in this description of dependent origination broken into 3 types of craving. And they are for pleasure, or craving for existence, or craving for annihilation. Now that's kind of got a specific meaning. The existence and annihilation is a little bit like wishing for more of the experience or wishing for the experience to go away. So they kind of branch off of feeling, and craving for pleasure, just craving for sense contact itself. But those are the 3 types of craving times the 6 types of objects. So you have 18 in there, in that little link there of feeling going into craving. But it makes total sense, you know, because you have those plus and minus and neutral feelings, and then you go into this like little bit of extra cling, which is the next word, which is more craving. So dependent on craving arises clinging. Narada Teras uses the term here, intensive or firm grasping. So what felt like, you know, kind of, now feels like, you know, you got a real grab on it. And now you might remember from your hindrance lists, and I don't remember for sure if we did go over this, but there are 4 types of craving. I think we did. To sense pleasures, to wrong view, rites and ceremonies. Hold on, to sense pleasures, wrong view, rites and ceremonies, doctrine of the self. Oh, and wrong view, I think. If somebody has a recall on that craving list that's different, let me know. But I know every detail isn't stuck in every head here. But anyways, the idea is that there are different types of craving. And the first one is to the sense pleasures, which is a kind of intensified and prolonged experience of the cetasika greed. And those other ones, the doctrine of self and the wrong view and everything, those all go under wrong view, clinging to wrong view. So this is where we talk about, it's not entirely about the object, it's about how you attend to the object that is at issue. And when you start really grasping, it's not just about the object, it's about the attribution that you have made and the wrong view you have taken of that object that causes craving for all of us to turn into clinging, where we really clutch. And once you're clutching, then we have a lot of work to do to reverse. You know, then karma is getting very fixed. Okay, I could say some other stuff. I'm going to say it. Dependent on clinging then arises existence. So under the influence of clinging, you engage in these actions, you know, so what might have been a volition is now kind of blooming into actions that accumulate more karma, including particular forms of rebirth. Now, when they talk about existence, you'll read active existence and passive, and active more has to do with this kind of events in life and the things that you do and the thought formations that you make and how they are influencing the ongoing flow of your present existence. And passive existence, they're 20, so that active existence refers to your 29 volitions that Lisa mentioned before. There's kind of a little bit of a repetitive thing. Actually, the wheel is kind of a spiral, because here we're kind of where we were on karmic formations, we're now kind of in the same zone, but in a more manifest way. We're kind of spiraling back over that. We're making things again in active existence. So you're creating activities there of a lifetime. In passive resistance, you're talking about the 32 resultant chitas, and it's more about rebirth and the ways that actual existence comes into being, placed somewhere, placed in some realm, placed with so many characteristics. And Bhante, we did a great job talking about this yesterday, and it's such an important teaching that everything we understand can still not account for everything we are. We come into this realm and this life with a lot. That's the passive existent resultant chitas that are formed classically, technically, at the moment of conception. They're not formed there, they are manifest there, they're expressed at that moment. Okay, so that is how clinging brings about existence. And existence in a presently active lifetime brings, well, either way, dependent on existence arises birth. So it could be the literal birth of a being, but in a presently active existence, it's the mundane resultant chitas and cetasikas and karma-born matter that are constantly changing and influencing. So that's always kind of a cluster. The cetasika, I learned it first Chaitasika too. I know you asked about that yesterday, Francesca. Anyways, that consciousness state is always reciprocally influencing material processes. And we talked about that yesterday too. So based on existence, birth arises, new things happen, new forms take shape, new events arise. And in a rebirth, a new being arises. And then, dependent on birth, arises death, old age and death. Just, there's not much said technically about that, just rooted in birth as the principal condition, because there's just no way around it. And then, based on decay and death, arises ignorance, with the arising of taints, because we are oppressed by infatuation with samsara. That's kind of the classical explanation there. So that is the kind of classical or technical way this works. Are there any questions with that? I'm gonna take this off the screen, so we'll look at some other stuff. Any thoughts or questions? Or Bante, if you want to fill in. Yeah, Lisa.
I was wondering, is it possible that you can plug in that 17 steps into this dependent core rising?
Okay, let's just flip ahead to that. I think it really, I mean, I think that it fits in pretty well. And I don't want to, you know, like over mash the paradigms together, but it does sort of fit in my mind. So this is the way I would lay it out. If you look at like ignorance and formations, I kind of think that's like step 1 and 2, where you have your bhavanga, vibration, and arrest. So that's like so primitive and just getting started that that I think it's like that, just starting. And then this consciousness, nama rupa, little whirl there, I would kind of put into like we're on adverting, you know, we're starting to pivot towards an existence or an event. And then the 5 sense spaces, you know, are like the sense consciousness arising, which happens after adverting. Contact to me is quite a bit like receiving. Feeling, this is the 7th link, is like investigating and determining. It's where we start putting our stuff on it. We're messing around with it and looking at it and associating to it. Then to me, that kind of gateway to karma moment, I would put, you know, somewhere in like feeling, craving, clinging. Because that's where we start taking what we've made and needing it and holding to it. So when we look at, you know, craving, that step with clinging the craving, I will kind of say that that reminded me of the Javana series, because we're kind of like going over it and strengthening it and intensifying our hold on our own view. And then when you get to like existence and birth, I would say it's a little bit like registration. It's like stopping and saying, this is what comes of this. So that is a layering of it. But I think what's really important, I mean, I am kind of like taking a puzzle and just mashing in pieces a little bit there, but there is something that I think resonates through both that's very important, which is that there's a kind of a formative period, a reactive period, and a karma producing period, and a formative period. So what happens, I think, in both the 17 steps in the wheel is that, you know, you're kind of, or a being, you know, there's kind of the raw materials of reality there, and they're coming forward. And then there is this reactivity. And the more hip we are to that reactivity, the more we catch it, the more we understand it and our particulars of it. the more we can slow down the next phase, which is the reactivity turning into a kind of construction that we hold on to and interrupt the flow of reality with. And that's the next part. And that's where things go awry and things go into dukkha and samsara. And so I think that kind of essential turning is under both. Although I may be like, matching up a little too much. Does that sort of fill it in for you, Lisa? Okay. Any other?
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting. Obviously, I kind of worked that one through. Any other thoughts on just the technicalities of it?
So I do have sort of a question or observation. I know that, so in my understanding in the past of the wheel of dependent origination, there are some things are attributed to past, some future, some present, and that makes it look like it's a larger scale. But when we look at it through the Abhidhamma, the scale seems much smaller up to a certain point, like up to contact maybe, or somewhere around there. So it's almost like a microscopic piece of time that we're looking at now versus, except maybe up to birth. It's like the scale of it is off, and I'm having trouble with that part of it.
Yes. That's a really good point, Jeff. It's because of my exposition where I'm just going 1 through 12 that you're feeling that, because there are two things that I want to bring up. One is that the scale is indeterminate. There is no scale on this. So I'm talking about it in these micro Abhidhamma gear terms. It would be like taking apart a watch, but really this is like also taking apart Big Ben. It's operating on the scale of like your lifetime and eons of human development, of other beings. It works on any scale this is going on. And that is a little dizzying, but that is a fact, I think, that the scale cannot be determined. And so we need to talk about it. That's why I'm kind of branching out from the little scale to a bigger scale. And I want to show you something. We have to talk about it on the scales that we can understand. And I think the smallest scale we can understand is a good place to start. And that's why I maybe heartlessly started you with 121 types of citta in the Abhidhamma study, because the smallest scale you can tolerate is the best place to start, I think, logically, because everything's building from that. If you really understand that little scale, then you're going to just blossom into all these other understandings. But it's very important to also just talk about a human scale. This is why I'm doing these gestures, but we're all like in little teeny scale right now. You're all little squares, and it's so funny. But anyways, yeah, we have to talk about it in the scale of experience. That's the most important thing. I think you need to understand how incredibly technically adept and brilliant the architects of the Abhidhamma were, all coming from the prime architect, the Buddha. And it's really important to understand that virtuosity of the Abhidhamma. But the whole point really of this course is to take that virtuosity and bring it to your experience so you can use it, which will be the next round. But I want to show you one thing. This is going to take just a minute, sorry. Because I don't know if I do have this. Okay, do you see this? This is is that clear to everyone? A wheel of life thing? Okay, cool. This is from Narada Tera's book. And it also addresses exactly what you brought up, Jeff, which is that this, even though there are two issues, it's going on every scale, but also is not going bing, bing, bing in a linear past, present, future way at all. So this kind of shows you that this is another way that is classically examined in looking at the wheel. And so it's very confusing in a way, but it also kind of straightens out some of what is naturally confusing that you brought up, which is that you can look at it, there's a few different ways to look at it, but this way is sort of saying that the past, now for one thing, you have to rotate the wheel. I had ignorance at about 5 o'clock. He's got ignorance up there at like 12 to 1. So just do that. And it moves that way too. So yeah, everything's so in motion. But so ignorance and the karmic formations, which he calls activities, are the past, in the sense that those are the things that set us up. And then the present is this whole thing 3 through 10. But he's dividing up the positive side and the active side. And I think that by positive side, it's a little bit more like the kind of passive resultants. Because, you know, based on this past, these passive resultants are going to start happening. But then you've got these active resultants coming in. So that's kind of the present that we're mashing in and mixing in. And then you go into the future, which all leads to the birth and decay of death. And then, so it's called the first, second, and third connection. And that's another way the wheel, you know, gets sliced up like a pie here. But there are a few different ways to look at this. But it is to say that anywhere you are, you have, it gets back to Charlie Pokorny's quote, you're causing and you're being caused at any moment. So you do have some impact because you're causing, but you are also being caused, and all of that is just there, and you got to work with it. You don't have options about working with it. It's kind of a drag sometimes. So that's kind of long-winded, but Jeff, does that kind of address?
I think it does. Thank you. Very much.
Okay. And
So does that mean we only have 8, 9, and 10 to work with?
That's a good question.
That's where we practice?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I want to say yes, and I want to say no to that. And maybe Bante might have something to say too, because that is where we practice. That is where, as humans, we have the most leverage. But if you've ever seen a Wheel of Life and Death, there's a Buddha in every realm. So I don't want to rule out that, you know, our awareness and our intentions aren't influencing all around. I don't want to rule that out. But our active work as humans, as the psychological funny beings that we are, yeah, I think it's mostly right in there. Bante, do you have anything that you would add to that about how in all these links we can and can't have influence? I don't know.
I think we can't get rid of any of these links. They will all be, you know, clocked together. And maybe the most important links from here is avijja and tanha, ignorance and craving. They are the two most important factors here.
Yes.
But having said that, the others are also, you know, mutually helpful. Just
Yes.
like we said yesterday about the Noble Eightfold Path, these are also working together. We can take one single factor out of the whole thing. So it's really important. And I also would like to highlight there is one Pali stanza, Atite hetavo pancha, idani phala panchakang, idani hetavo pancha, ayating phala panchakang. So 5 factors in the past are causing the present result, and the present 5 factors will cause the future result. So they are all part of these 12 links. So they are all working together, I must say.
Yes. Thank you. No, I think that it always sounds so much truer in Pali. But yeah, that really helps. And you know, And also to bring in, I think that's helpful to bring in that ignorance is very important. Because there is that kind of spiraling effect, and both at ignorance and craving, there's a point where we can particularly address things. We can, by assuming ignorance, we can start working with it. Okay, I'm going to take this down. Is that cool? It's a very nice layout from that book, I feel. So yeah, any other questions at this point?
I just had a comment that came back to what Lisa asked and what you and Bhante were responding to, that the point at which you can practice is dependent upon your own understanding and mental development. So, you know, the uninstructed worldling is not going to be aware of, say, contact and things like that because their mind is not at that point, so they can't work with it. So they're stuck with working with, oh, I'm craving this or I'm attached to this. But someone who in their meditative state can go deeper and more subtle, they'll be able to see some of those earlier things and work with them, like Bhante was saying, the contact and feeling and so on. And so you can work at that stage rather than one of the, say, I don't want to call it coarser stages that anybody could see.
I think that's really true. And then there's a reciprocal thing where understanding this gives you more subtlety and awareness as
Right.
you're sitting, you know, and then yeah, that's another kind of mutuality condition there. But I do think sometimes people work on things without the vocabulary or the understanding in a funny way too, which is kind of gets back to the idea of the Buddha in every realm. We have a shared vocabulary and way we're trying to look at things based on what the Buddha taught us. And because it has such a felt accuracy, you know, this vocabulary and way of understanding moves us all very well. And because we're together and talking, we help each other move well too. But I do also want to just say, you know, I've seen a lot of people who, without, you know, a word of it, you know, maybe are just wandering around questioning and saying, I feel ignorant, something's wrong. Even that person who just says something's wrong, they're working on ignorance. So it's very interesting.
And when somebody has one of those kind of mind-blowing moments where they go, oh my gosh, that's why I do that. That's where they're tapping into one of these parts of the cycle they hadn't really been aware of before or hadn't even known they were going through.
Right, right. It's very interesting. So you kind of, as you think about these and you kind of go through your experiences with people and hearing people talk about their different experiences, you kind of see, well, I think you're trying to stop clinging from going into craving. I know this is kind of an aside, but Bhante and I both have looked at the homework and we will hopefully get grades too soon, but they were very good. I mean, everybody really, really incorporated a lot of understanding vocabulary in a short period of time. It was fantastic. So nobody worry about your grade. But Jeff, you brought up something about addiction in one of your examples. And I think that was a really useful thought. And that, you know, in some ways, samsara works on an addiction model. And so, you know, so like the example I'm bringing is 12 steps programs. Which I think are fantastic and very often, you know, ironically the same number, 12, but very often people are working on things with a different vocabulary, but a similar kind of conceptual basis. And it's understood on very many levels. Sometimes it's very superficial, but it's like the idea of starting with sila. Sometimes, you know, sometimes if you just follow the rules and start with that, it moves you forward. And so, you know, I think there are, as there are Buddhas in every realm, there are all these ways to work, and you can see that. But I feel like, you know, this understanding of the Buddha's conception just kind of cracks open something inside us together. Is everybody good on this chunk? Okay, I think with this stuff, I like frequent short breaks. So what would you think if we take a 10-minute break, come back at 9:05, and then we're going to talk about it even more about like how we can work this, okay? All right.
Thank you.
People are getting back in. Hi. So Bante volunteered, you know, this is so deeply thoughtful, and he volunteered to do some chanting of the you can explain what it is so we can just like also absorb that level.
Yeah, like now I really like to do the chanting of Paticca Samuppada, maybe just to give you a different vibe. And also I invite this wonderful class to chant the Paticca Samuppada, dependent origination in English, you know, make it like a singing. That will be so wonderful. I remember there is one of my friend, we were teaching last time, we were teaching introduction to Buddhist psychology course together. And so I was chanting Karaniya Metta Sutta in Pali, and he was chanting the English version so beautifully. So I think it will be really helpful for all of you. Maybe I'm sure there are a lot of people who can sing here very well. So sing the Paticca Samuppada English version. You know, that will be so helpful for you to remember. I know Dr. Jacobs is also a poet, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe if I can, yeah, I can share the link over here. Can you see? Okay, I have this one to begin with. Dr. Jacobs was, maybe it is too small, right? Let me make it bigger. Can you see? So she started with this. Yo paticca samuppadang passati, so dhammang passati. Yo dhammang passati, so paticca samuppadang passati. And this is what I want to chant. You can join. Can you read? Okay. Avidya pacchaya sankhara, sankhara pacchaya viññānaṁ, viññāna pacchaya nama rupam, nama rupa pacchaya salayatanam, salayatana pacchaya passo, phassa pacchaya vedana, vedana pacchaya tanha, tanha pacchaya upadanam, upadana pacchaya bhavo, bhava pacchaya jati, jati pacchaya jara maranam, soka parideva dukkha domanassu pāyāsā sambhavanti evame kevalassa dukkha khandhassa samudayo hoti avidyāyatveva asesa viraga nirodha sankhara nirodho sankhara nirodha viññāna nirodho viññāna nirodha nama rupa nirodho nama rupa nirodha salayatana nirodho salayatana nirodha phassa nirodho phassa nirodha vedana nirodho Vedana nirodha tanha nirodho. Tanha nirodha upadana nirodho. Upadana nirodha bhava nirodho. Bhava nirodha jati nirodho. Jati nirodha jara maranam. Soka parideva dukkha domanasupaya sa nirujjanti. Eva metassa kevalassa dukkhakham dhassa nirodhoti. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And this little one I mentioned here, that is Atite over here. You can see, let me also make it bigger. I will share the link. Oops. Did I miss it? Okay. Over here. Oh, here, this one. Atite hetavo pancha idani phala panchakang idani hetavo pancha ayating phala panchakang. So the meaning we have here, it's all depending on the 5 factors. So there are 5 factors that same thing from the dependent origination, these links. So 5 links of them will be the causes that makes our present, and 5 causes in the present will be the factors that lead to our future. I will share that link as well. Okay, thank you. Maybe someone can, maybe, Dr. Jacobs, you can also invite someone to sing in chat. I mean, later, maybe in a break.
Yeah, let's see if anybody's up for that. It would be beautiful. It was very beautiful to hear that, though. Yeah, it really, I mean, I'm just looking at the chat. It kind of gives you like this kind of flow of it. And then I love the reversal. So what is that word? Nirodho? Is that like related to nirvana or nibbana?
Cessation of avijja will lead to the rest of those. So one by one. So
Yes.
in the reverse order too.
Yeah.
Evametassa kevalassa dukkhakkhandassa nirodho hoti. By this way, this overall complete eradication, cessation of this dukkha will
Yes,
happen.
this will. Yeah, and lots of our vocabulary is showing up. You can see the, it starts to make sense. You can see the universal chaitasikas that show up, and a lot of the vocabulary of that. It's really cool. It actually makes sense. Well, thanks. I think that is a very refreshing kind of intermission there. So thank you, Bhante.
If
Really.
that helps for a break, for a change.
Yes, yes, because you need to your mind is working hard, and then that kind of washes over it like drinking water. So let's just go through the wheel again and talk about it more like how we experience it. And please feel free to kick in. And if you're one of the more quieter people that hasn't spoken up, but you kind of want to, just raise your hand. You know, on the hand raising button. And, you know, if you have any thoughts about how you experience these links, please bring them in, because this is what makes it come to life in another way. So I also want to say that everything that I say about the wheel is very indebted to my root teacher, who is Roshi Sojun Diane Martin, who studies the wheel for decades and decades. And she's also, she's actually an analyst, and she just has a wild way of speaking and looking at things, and it's influenced me quite a bit. And in a way I'm very, very thankful for. She calls the wheel the theater of the self. And she says, if you want to know where karma's hitting you, just, it's early childhood. Just look at that. You know, she's very like, this is all very, very real. So she's helped me a lot. So we're going to start with ignorance. You know, we are experiencing this mind that is confused by objects all the time. There are so many ways we could be taking in reality, so many aspects of reality we could be taking in at any moment, but we just have this kind of selectivity and this kind of particularity and this kind of habitualness of how we experience. And that is our ignorance right there. And you know, ignorance doesn't mean, you know, stupidity, or it doesn't even necessarily mean you don't have knowledge, but it does mean that there's a lot we're ignoring all the time, the root. And so that's kind of where we start our own personal kind of dukkha creation, is that we just can't possibly really see broadly and clearly enough. I actually want to put up, just for a second, I'm sure you've all seen this, but I just want to put up one of these, I think, Tibetan images of the wheel. Are you getting that? Okay, because the imagery is so amazing and does help. I'm not going to go through all the types of imagery, but just to remember that, and just to, you know, have that in your head and in your eyes. The imagery really does fill out a lot of the psychological understanding. So I'm just going to leave that there. Okay, so any thoughts on ignorance? Okay, we're going to move it right along into karmic formations. So in this kind of split with reality that we naturally have, it's almost by definition, we start constructing things. And that's like our volition. We start constructing mentally because we just don't know how to manage it all. We really don't. There's too much. And so we make up some categories, we make up some reactions, we make up some, our khandas, we use that and we start making stuff up. And, you know, that image with this link is the potter making wheels. So we just spin stuff into stuff that contains stuff, a lot of stuff there. In that article that I put on Slack that I really liked a lot, Venerable Geshe says, misconceptions naturally lead to poorly planned actions. So he's talking about how ignorance just naturally leads to volition. And that is the importance. That's why at this link, and Bhante pointed this out, this is an important link from 1 to 2. This is where the importance of vow and intention comes in. Because while we can't get it all, if underneath it and before it, we're just saying, well, this is where I want to aim, that helps. That really helps. And so I think that's the best kind of medicine there. And we all take vows, and fulfill them to different degrees, but taking them still matters so much, I think, especially right here. So then we have our potter at the wheel, and this leads to consciousness. So kind of the seed of awareness takes hold in the fold, in the kind of fold of our constructions, which are meeting now in a kind of dualism with reality as presented and reality as we're constructing. It's kind of a fold there. And that's where, if you remember in the very first day, I'm talking about that flashlight in the cave. That's where we start, like, we turn on the flashlight, we start looking around. And another good quote from that article here is a helpful definition of what consciousness means here. He says, consciousness does not refer to consciousness in a general sense, which itself is primordial, existing without beginning, just like matter and space. Rather, consciousness here refers to a particular instance of consciousness that carries the imprints of karmic actions. So that's what I'm saying about the flashlight. You know, he's saying it's not that consciousness as a force is born here. I think that would be like saying, you know, gravity is born where my phone is sitting on the table. But he's saying this particular instance of consciousness is arising. So any thoughts up to here? This is a very critical starting juncture. That's why we start here, because this is like where it really is heavy here. Okay, I'll roll on. Consciousness leads to nama rupa, mentality, materiality. So this is your mutuality moment where consciousness and materiality and mentality are so together. In mentality here, I think chaitasikas, you know, and chitas, you know how that interacts so, you know, indescribably complexly. So that's kind of what I think is happening here. You know, we begin a dawning awareness starts to really take shape. Now this is, you know, like an earlier trace of what we're going to see in link number 11 of birth. But it's kind of critical to realize the actual dependence. We have a kind of a hybrid existence of mentality, materiality, and consciousness. There's a nice quote from Susan Murphy in the book, Minding the Earth, Mending the World, which is a really nice kind of Buddhist take on dealing with what can often feel hopeless environmental crisis that we're in. But she says, this is our particular situation of possessing a consciousness that has no beginning or end when we look into it, and which blooms in a body that is limited in time and capacity. I like that description of this mix right here. But it's hard to kind of conceptualize it, but this is the, you know, to say, you know, this consciousness leads to this body, but just that they're so reciprocally dependent all the time. And this is called that hidden vortex of the wheel. And, you know, it's just saying that the proximate cause of each other is each other. And that's hard to kind of get, but that's just how it is. Now, there's an amazing quote about this, and it's from the Mahanidana. I'm going to take this down. The Mahanidana Sutta. And in this, there are a lot of suttas that talk about these 12 steps, Paticca Samuppada. And there are two that I've come across that take very interesting variations off of the classic 12 links. And one is the Mahanidana Sutta, which is the Great Causation Sutta. And there are two kind of deviations, but I want to talk about one thing. It really starts here with this hidden vortex and makes a quite a big deal of this. And I want to put up something to show you. I think I can go right to it. Okay. No. Do you guys see something? No. I'm getting a lot of no's and yeses. All right, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Is this up?
Yeah, an alternative causation sequence.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I'm trying to see it myself. Okay. Let me make it bigger. Okay. Okay, so this is from commentaries on it. I kind of copied how they laid this out. But we're looking at, it really, like, it doesn't start at ignorance. It starts with this hidden vortex. See on the bottom, mentality, materiality, and consciousness, and they are just influencing each other. We're going to talk about this detour off of craving, which is truly amazing, later. Okay, so I'm just talking about this little part here, but it's very interesting. It just really starts with the creation of samsara here. Sorry to put you through that because I have one other piece of it that I want to put up, which is this, a quote about this. And this description, I just love this language so much. This is a description of this hidden vortex right here. And I would like to put in a personal request for Sherry. I would like you to, would you read this? Because like your cadence and phrasing will work really well with this. If you don't mind, if you're okay.
Mahinadana quote, the Great Sutra on Causation. Therefore, Ananda, this is the cause, source, origin, and condition for consciousness, namely mentality, materiality. It is to this extent, Ananda, that one can be born, age, and die, pass away, and re-arise, to this extent that there is a pathway for designation, to this extent that there is a pathway for language, to this extent that there is a pathway for description, to this extent that there is a sphere for wisdom, to this extent that the round turns for describing this state of being, that is, when there is mentality, materiality, together with consciousness.
Thank you. Thank you a lot. That was exact. I knew you would just nail that because you have to kind of get all those phrases in. And all those phrases are amazing to me. I mean, this really is saying that this is like this incredible, I can't get another word, but vortex hub of being human, and that it is really the mutuality of consciousness and nama rupa that makes the human realm. It is not even one or the other, and it is not even that they affect each other. It is their true mutuality. That's so beautiful. I love, so it is to this extent, and this extent is he's saying to the extent of their mutuality. It is to this extent that we are born, age, and die. So it's just this that makes us have life. It is to this extent that there's a pathway for designation, language, and description. Pathway. Now it's going to switch to a sphere for wisdom, but I can't think of, what describes experience more than designation, language, and description. That's just what I do all day long, is designate and describe. I once realized that I was like kind of addicted to describing things, I'd be like, I don't know, like that is kind of a poetry thing, but and it's useful as poetry thing, but everything doesn't have to be described all the time. And when you bundle it up in language, you change it. So you kind of got to make your call carefully there. But I love that language and description are put into this sutta, this very moment of this sutta. And then it changes to, and those are pathways because they have a certain linearity, but then it switches to the sphere of wisdom. So we can take all these pathways of describing the heck out of everything and turn it into a sphere, which is like a more accurately radial way of looking. And that's where wisdom comes in when you're really looking at it in that way. That it is because of this same mutuality that we can actually have wisdom and work on wisdom and acquire wisdom. And that is why the round turns. That's why we're in samsara, and that's why we're here. And that's all because of this mutuality vortex in the wheel links. So I thought that was really, really beautiful. It's what allows us to be human. It's what relegates us to being human. And it's what allows these pathways and spheres to develop. So this is really, really important, this little linkage. Any thoughts on this? It's very kind of deep, to say the least. Are you all doing okay? Good. Okay. It's really incredibly powerful to just muck around in it. But let's go back to the wheel, and we're swirling here, but now we're going to swirl back into the bigger and go from Namarupa to the 6 sense spaces. So it is our human material sensitivity that allows this self idea to start to coagulate and to develop the capacity to interact. That's what that is there. We're going into developing the 6 sense spaces from our kind of human swirl there. And that means we have very particular ways to interact. Now, I always think about this with like our animals, they have the same essential equipment, but they have different ranges and spheres of things. And when you see your cat, a minute before you hear it reacting to something, and you can just tell, sometimes the cat will just, Zane will just like, be talking to me, and then all of a sudden he'll bolt down the hallway. I don't know what he's experiencing. But that's just another mammal. Just think about immaterial beings and think about all the things that we just can't even think about or conceptualize. Think about plants. There are just so many kind of bases for interacting, kind of internally and externally. So it is that swirl that leads to our bases, which leads to contact, which leads to the actual fact that we meet. Everything is a meeting constantly. And so because we have mentality, materiality, and consciousness kind of giving us a base where we can develop certain very particular receptacles or receptors, for interacting, and then we can meet the object. So big moment here. We've gotten all the way here just to like meet our first object. This is kind of like the moment when the bhavanga of rebirth first meets an object and active cognition starts in a life. And it's interesting to think, when is the first active cognition? It's clearly before birth in humans. But this is what this is about. In the classical definition, that when the sense organs develop in utero is when kamas can start. So once you have the capacity to register something, you can start doing stuff with it. And then, the raw interaction of the object, the sense space within the field, which is the sense consciousness, happen. And also a kind of dualism doesn't start here, but kind of, I guess if there was a crack earlier, it starts to widen in our dualistic experience, because now we really have internal, external. Okay, how's everybody doing? So we're about to get to feeling, and I'm gonna get you a little snagged there again. Is it making sense with experience, or how how you experience things? Okay. All right, you'll flag me down if I just float away into the sky and you're not making sense anymore. Promise? Okay. All right.
I think you're doing just fine, Dr.
Okay.
Jacobs.
Thank you. He's very reassuring person. Thank you.
Well, in the Mahanidana Sutta itself, Ananda was telling Buddha, this is so clear, and Buddha said, no, Ananda. So if he had that much of a hard time understanding it, I mean,
Right.
mere mortals ask how much can we understand? So you're doing
Yeah.
just fine.
That's right. Well, we can talk about it a lot and never truly fully describe it. It's true. But it is to this extent that we even have this pathway for description, and it's very useful because we can kind of walk it together. And yeah, and it is you know, every instance of going back to it flushes out more understanding. So that's just what we keep doing. But you're right. Thank you. So, okay, contact leads to feeling, which is this basic valence that is based on our dualism, and it accompanies the interaction. It's a natural push-pull. This is a natural thing based on our construction that's been happening through all these links. The image of feeling that I've seen on the wheel with, you know, like the Tibetan wheel is an arrow in the eye. You've all seen that? I mean, you couldn't be more vivid to say feeling isn't, you know, so helpful. So our senses let in stuff, but, you know, that is painful. That's the image of feeling. And in this article by Venerable Gache, he says that feelings are not the problem, but, quote, the wrong thoughts that exaggerate the qualities of objects. So I like that because, you know, this idea of like, it's not necessarily the object alone that carries the karma. It is the attention paid to it is so important. And I think he puts it really well. Now, there's a great kind of longish quote I want to give from him. And I wish I'd had this on our afternoon and feelings, but I didn't. I read it later. Although feeling here includes both sensual and mental sensations, I think that for human beings, subtle mental sensations beyond conscious awareness are often the primary motivating factor in our actions. We are intensely social animals. I want to underline that, and I like that he said animals, intensely social animals, and relatively few of our actions are directly related to achieving sensual gratification. Much more of our mental energy is focused on how we might like others to perceive us, or spending time with people or in places that we enjoy, or I would say trying to create interactional situations that feel good to ourselves. We spend a lot of energy on that. As such, what we consider worth pursuing is constructed more by subtle concepts than biological instinct. So the feelings most relevant to what we crave are likewise subtle ones. Usually we aren't even fully aware of our own motivation for actions. A preliminary step towards identifying the relation between this link of feeling and the link of craving is to slow down and develop sufficient concentration to observe this subtle interplay. I think that's one of the best descriptions ever of psychology relating to practice. I really love that. You have to look really deeply to start with, and you have to kind of assume that, you know, this gets back to Freud, a lot is unconscious and remains that way, but you have to keep pursuing the edge. And pursuing the edge and practice and sitting is the same thing. You know, just constantly kind of assuming there is a lot, assuming the unknown unknowns, assuming there's a lot that we don't understand about our internal state. And I think it's very important to realize that feeling, that subtle, what he says about the subtlety of feelings. And that, you know, so much of it, this does get back to what we talked about in the afternoon on feeling, so much of it has to do with interacting. We are intensely social animals. We need each other. We need a certain amount of positive energy from each other. We go around seeking that, you know, like those pigs who seek truffles. I mean, we do. It's so important to us. It is a sustaining, you know, one of the things that sustains matter is chitta. Well, I think also that's kind of a similar statement. One of the things that sustains us as a nutriment is positive attention from each other. And, I kind of know that from work. I mean, a lot of what therapy is that you can, because of the very ideal circumstances, you can deliver this super positive, focused attention. And we all crave it so much. But like with, practice states, if it doesn't move you to more insight, then you get stuck there. Like when they talk about the imperfections of insight and they talk about how people get into feeling good in their meditative states, it's the same thing as how many people get into feeling good in therapy, because you have this idealized situation for getting positive and questioning and unpresumptuous attention. But you can't get stuck there. You kind of got to use it to move things. Use that good energy of the meditative state or of the attention to move your awareness. So that's kind of a big aside, but it is, the point he makes is very important in using this, because we all do want sensual gratification. And, despite what we talked about yesterday, we will still go to the restaurant and order our favorite thing on the menu. We like things that taste good, but much more than that, we like to have positive interactions and to feel like we're loved and appreciated. We're so driven by that and by the early deficits that we all experience in that. That is what I think holds karma in the human life. So it's really important. This is very much like the famous Dogen quote, which is actually on the back of my Rakasu here, that you probably have heard, to study Zen is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be realized by the myriad things. So you start with the study. If you don't look closely and as carefully as you can, you're going to miss more than you need to. We're still going to miss a lot. But then once you understand it, it is in the service of letting it dissolve and fall away so that reality can come to you. And it's just such a beautiful, beautiful quote. Yeah. So Venerable Geshe also says a good way to look at what to do with this: when feelings arise, the best response would be to carefully observe the nature of the mind and how it responds to those feelings. So this is how we've talked about this a lot, how to an intervention point, between feelings and craving and clinging. I've read different things that say, it's really those two links, which are the best intervention point. I mean, it's all kind of the same thing, but I think that feelings very naturally lead to cravings. It's hard not to feel something really strongly and not feel urgent about it. As we talked about in that afternoon on feelings, we're wired to feel kind of urgent about our feelings. That's kind of the definition of feelings, is bodily experiences that feel kind of urgent. So I think it's very hard to intervene there. But once you note that urgency, before it converts into a locked up action or a locked up point of view or a locked up mental formation, there I think you can bring this attention to it and loosen it up on a good day, right? Okay, so that's a big thing on feelings, to clinging, and to craving. Any thoughts there? Or, this is a place where we all do have a lot of experiences. Are there any that you would bring in that look a little different to you now, thinking about it in this light?
I was thinking about, you said we are intensively social animals. Maybe that's why those monks will go into the forest. They will eliminate that right away.
Well, maybe that's why they go into the forest too. Yeah, that's a good point, because there are particular kinds of training that have to do with cutting the social bonds. But
And they don't need the positive energy, from the interaction.
True. That's true. And maybe That's a good point. I mean, maybe that's a way to evolve, and maybe those people are already kind of evolved to a point to be able to do that. But it's very interesting. That's a good point. And I mean, I know I've had occasions to like do there are these like artist residencies where you go somewhere and for 1 or 2 weeks, and you do have dinner with people, but that's it. The whole rest of the time, you know, nothing. And this was a while ago, but I was also out of range of internet and stuff. And so I kind of experienced, except for those dinners, I experienced like the cut off of that. And it was weirdly refreshing. So maybe sometimes it's good to take a break from how intensely social we are. And
So even though we thought we need the positive energy from interaction, actually we don't really have to have it.
well, maybe I shouldn't have put it so absolutely. I kind of overstate things sometimes to make a point, but I think there are some people who do not have to have it. I think you're right. I think most people do. And most people can take a break from it too. It's not like, you know, like we were talking yesterday, how long can you go without eating? How long could we go without anybody having a good interaction with us? I don't know. You know, some of us, you know, have gone long periods, and sometimes we're in situations that are very negative, and we have to endure them for a long time. So I think people can, but yeah, maybe it's not so absolute. It's just, I'll put it as a very strong tendency of us humans.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
We humans are actually social beings for sure, but all of us need some time for ourselves, our own space, personal space. No matter how much you think you are so much close to your family or your loved ones, you still need some time off from everyone, you know, to be with yourself. And let's say, like, when you get angry, you don't want to talk to anyone, right? You want to really talk to yourself. And I think what those Buddhist monks do in all those spiritual practitioners, what they do is they get that training in the solitary loneliness, like Wordsworth said, bliss of solitude. You know, that solitude is necessary. That's why we also call noble silence. That really helps. In practice, you have to learn the theory, maybe in solitude, but when you come back to the society, you have to practice it. That theory can be applied
Yes.
in the society in a better way. Now, unfortunately, due to this technology, the smartphones and all, people are still losing that beautiful communication with the fellow humans. They don't talk to anymore. They want to really be so much engrossed with the smartphones and those technological gadgets, and they don't know how to talk to people even. They have the xenophobia so much now than before. So are we going back to those, you know, again, loneliness, solitude, something to think about.
I think that's really important. And there's a couple of things that makes me think of. One is that these devices make us lonely, but they also make us unable to have solitude in another way, because we are constantly in the potential of contact. And I think that's very difficult, but you're really right about needing solitude. You know, people vary how much they need, but I think that every meditation is an exercise in solitude. every sitting. And what you feel though is interesting, because in solitude, you can also feel the longing for the contact, object contact or people contact. I mean, when we're sitting, often, I think most of us probably feel sometimes where, it's kind of quiet and you can kind of feel your mind fishing around for something. It's like that little moment, like, you're fishing around because you have a kind of a hunger for an object. So in the solitude, I would say you also feel like the negative space of social need. But yes, it's extremely important to also say, and I think both Lisa and Bhante bring in the other side of the coin there, that if we don't have times when our mind flows without interaction, then our mind gets very, very cluttered. And that's a kind of a painful feeling. Yeah, especially, to the introverted of us, which we all have that streak.
I always thought going to a forest has a lot to do with limiting senses. Everything comes to the five sense doors. And the mind starts building up a whole bunch of other stuff based on the things that comes to the sense doors. So one extreme way of like trying to force yourself to achieve Nibbana is to cut off all your senses, like take my eyes off, take my nose off, and you're not going to survive as a human. You still need the body to maintain. So I always thought going to the forest is a lot to do with limiting the amount of sensual stimuli. That way you can really start looking inward in your mind.
Yes.
For example, where I live, I got 3 younglings, and no matter how hard I try, I cannot sit for long because someone's going to come and interrupt my sitting, which is not a problem. It is what it is right now. But I do recognize that if I had I jokingly said it to someone, if I ever become a monk, I'm probably going to go to a forest because that's where I think I'll find the least amount of stimuli.
Yes, thank you. You probably want to spend a day in a forest now and then, I could see. But
I do. That's the other thing. I do. I do take my forest walk. It's not a forest, but I have my own ways of finding my forest. So that is very much true.
That's good. That's good. Because then you come back refreshed as a parent and but I like the way you say it. It just is the situation you're in now. And of course, part of being intensely social is making families and having families. But I think you also are very right that it's not just the social input that we're limiting when we sit, or in the forest dwelling monks experience, we're limiting just the kind of range of sensory stimuli also. I mean,
accessibility.
It's not like, what did you say, Kyle?
It was Corey.
Sorry.
It's fine. Accessibility, limiting accessibility.
Yes.
Because that's not to interrupt you, but I mean, that's where a lot of the addictions run rampant, whether it's cyber addictions and things like that. It's accessibility, whether you're just addicted to surfing social media or commenting and things like that. Smartphones have made a platform that is too easy for everybody to access.
Video games, that's the other thing. Video games is a big one where addiction can like spiral out of control real fast, real quick.
Mm-hmm.
It's very true. Yeah, a lot of these addictions kind of overlay sensory and social stimuli, because like, a big thing about, the phone, the likes on your Instagram and that kind of thing. It's like you feel like you're getting some kind of solid human attention there. But like Bhante said, this isn't conversation. This isn't being together and really trying to share what's in our hearts and minds. That's like just a ping and a like and a this and a that. But it kind of is almost like a false representation, like a false idol of that.
I think we all can find examples of people we know who are like grossly unsocial if you meet them in person, but have millions of followers on YouTube or Facebook or whatever. So that's the way I look at all these social media. Ultimately, this is just another form of craving. you're just craving for attention or something, some form of a craving.
It is. If I could just share like a personal experience is I've learned that my body does not like to sit neutral. So I can sit and meditate for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, what have you. But yeah, there are times even in class that I find myself staring at a screen and then I stare off on my other screen and I'm like, I'll start Googling things that you're talking about. And then my Googles will like start going off in another way. And I'm like, okay, stop, come back to class. And sitting neutral is difficult. I can practice it in meditation, but sitting neutral and paying attention to you talking or something else in class or at work, the body does not like to be neutral because of all that external stimuli that you're so used to just interacting with.
It's true. It's true. We're existing, we've been trained up and up and up into it very gradually. We have been. And so it is hard to drop that level. And, I'm sure it also has to do a bit with your wiring and just, kind of innate things. But it's really hard. You're right. If it's all right there, there's no barrier and contact, contact is about the object impinging into awareness. It's not about us like running around seeking necessarily. And so there's so many objects right there at the awareness door. And some of them are knocking and some of them are just ramming it right down. Yeah. Kyle, I feel like you've been wanting to say something. Is that true?
Oh yeah, I should have wrote it down. Like throughout this conversation, there's been a lot of good topics, and I wanted to say and then forgot about. But yeah, one I can think of, I was just going to mention about social media to try to make it as short as possible. It's just interesting because like they've engineered them to hack your biology. So like they're actually dopamine farms. And if anything's free, it's because you're the product. So when you're on these social media outlets and you're scrolling, they have an algorithm that knows exactly what you want to see. And they're going to keep it dangling in front of you like a carrot, because the highest like spike in your dopamine like will happen like right before you actually get something. So it's like the anticipation of getting it keeps you hooked and addicted. And then they'll occasionally throw one your way and then you'll max out. But it's actually, and then once you get it, you go back to your baseline and you continue to scroll. But yeah, it's just sad because there are so many things in our life, whether that be like food science and, the biology behind food and how we crave certain things and why, like the fast food industry has done what they've done to make the majority of Americans obese, and what the American diet has done to the rest of the world as well. But it's just interesting because it's always unfortunate. As long as, people are doing things just to make money, if not people at heart, there's always going to be some sort of hacking of our biology, whether that be with food or technology. And yeah, I've just realized with my own phone now, I've basically told like friends and family, I don't do group chats anymore. I don't have any social media. I stay off my phone as much as possible. And I've noticed not only am I happier, but there's less room for anxiety. And I feel like a lot of anxieties now and a lot of mental health disorders are coming about because of this constant connection to technology, whether that be like bullying or feeling inadequate. And, like at one point in time, because I think they said, in anthropology, we're supposed to be in tribes of like 30 some odd people. And you're used to maintaining relationships with people at that level. But you can't realistically be best friends with hundreds of people, compare yourself with all of these people like at that level. And normally, like if you would compare yourself to your neighbor and they had something a little bit better than you, it usually meant it was something like you could realistically obtain as well. Because it would be like, oh, wait, we're in the same boat. And, his lawn looks better, his food looks better, he must be doing something different. But now your neighbor is, people who are totally outside of your own socioeconomic level, and they're using filters and they're taking the highlights of their life and then over embellishing them as well. And it's making people further feel inadequate. And it's like, yeah, just in general, there doesn't seem to be much good that's come from social media. I mean, like with anything else though, it's a tool. Like there are like good outlets you can have on there and there are like good news sources you can use, but I guess it's a balance like with anything else.
Well, you're getting a lot of likes in the chat, Kyle. Speaking of likes, so I think we are all like, you really articulated something that I think resonates for all of us quite a bit. That that idea of our biology being hacked is so real and so painful. It's hard to know where to go with that, except for cutting yourself off in certain ways. I got my Instagram account got hacked, and so it was the best thing that happened. Yeah, because then I was just like, I'm done with it, and I'm done with it. You know, I no longer see things and think, ooh, how many likes? You know, I'm kind of going in the world of objects a little bit more. But I know that I can say that, and yet I know that I'm so much more trained by the corporations or whatever. I don't know how to phrase it. It's very interesting and sad. And
I also have a very similar story. 10 years ago, when I was in Facebook, so that's the last time I was on Facebook. Someone said they're going to the toilet or bathroom on Facebook. I'm like, that's it. I don't need this much information. And I'm out. So my point is exactly the same. I really don't need it. I realize it's agitating me. This sensory input that I'm getting from other people's lives, it's influencing me, and I decided I'm going to cut it off. And for me, and I'm a computer science professor, and this is an IT guy saying, and the best thing I did 10 years ago is get off from all social media platforms. And to this day, I defend myself for doing that.
yes, no, I think it's great too. And I think, you know, like everything, you know, we have to kind of fold it into our meditative awareness. So even if some of it's, you know, beyond our control, the more that we can sit in plainness, the more we can actually even see this. But I agree that, you know, I never got into Facebook because I could see it coming, you know, and it's just, and I'm old too, so that helps. But yeah, it's just really observing, you know, just like the Buddha said, observing what happens, and is it fruitful? Does it lead to your liberation? Does it lead to the liberation of the people around you, or does it not? And even with these things, we're still watching that and saying, you know, is this contributing to a bodhisattva presence through me or not? It's a very interesting, hard question to keep in mind. Should we take a little break from our media? Okay, let's take a real, yeah, well, let's come back at 10:15. How's that? Okay, this is great, you guys. Take care. We'll be back talking with Francesca about cat food. But there are lots of important things in life, and cat food is one of them. So how's everyone doing? There's a lot of stuff. That was a great discussion. Anything come to people over the break about it?
For me, the word subtle from the Geshe, and I'd like to know what that passage is or where you found that.
Oh, okay. That passage is from an article that I mentioned on the Slack.
Oh, good deal.
The link, yeah.
Get it there.
Yeah, and he goes through the link. So I think when he's on the feeling link is where you'll see that.
Mhm.
But subtle is a very important word. And, you know, objects of mind are classified as gross or subtle. Many things are, and many things are subtle, which is just to say it's so complicated and it's operating on a level that requires some effort to be aware of, I think.
It's very quiet.
Yeah.
So like you have to hear it. You have to listen for it.
You have to listen. That's a nice description. Yes, exactly.
The gross stuff just smacks us in the face, like cognitive behavior therapy. Bam.
Yes. Thank you. A little bias there, I agree with. Yeah. And yeah, and you know, that whole, you know, the more we sit the more we experience the subtlety of everything. And, and that's why I think Abhidhamma study is good, because it actually names so many things that are subtle.
Mhm.
It's interesting to do that. And you can't hold on to every name and every subtlety, but when you name subtleties, they're quicker. They're quicker to you.
Yeah. It's
They're
just,
quicker to come to you. I mean, yeah. It's a nice word to pull out.
yeah, we put a name on something, which we
Mhm.
love to do.
Yes, we do. We do. But it has its use. And as long as, you don't go around walking around, carrying your 17 steps of perception like a suitcase,
Mhm.
just having it kind of in your well-being docket. Yeah. Anything else that is left over? Yeah, it's incredibly interesting to look at the wheel, and and this multi-scale thing that Jeff brought up is important, because it is true that when we're looking at these subtleties, it is really important that we look at our early experience, because early experience is just so broadly formative. When you don't have all of this cognition to process things, and they're coming at you talking about the opposite of subtlety. As a kid, I mean, we forget how really big impingements are of emotions and interactions and things we feel, and times we need comfort. It's a really very huge, and those make very big impact. So it's an important exploration. I guess this is also a statement about therapy and cognitive behavioral. You can't just, fix it on the back end. You kind of have to get in there and really understand the motivations also. Not that there's anything wrong with working on fixing it on the back end, but it also requires this kind of comprehension of early experience, I think, and of the impact of it. Yeah, so if you're ready to spin a little bit more, the rest of the wheel is kind of the downfall. We've kind of looked at how we set it up, and this is like, if you're on the Ferris wheel, this is the down part. And, because once we're clinging and grasping, we all know that feeling, I think. Then it requires more intervention to undo. And then, we're bringing about this second kind of layer of creation. The first layer was subtle, kind of creation of formations, creations of ways that we see things, volitions. But this layer, I think, is more manifest, gross creation of problems. And this is where it happens. And so, clinging, we're in the grasping, leads to existence, leads to birth, actual things happening. And the birth, the things that we hold to absolutely fail us. And we've all experienced it on so many scales. And then the idea here is important, that then link number 12 leads to link number 1, which is that we don't like that feeling. So we do something to mess with it, or ignore it, or put part of it behind us where we don't see it. So it is true that the experience of decay and loss and death very frequently is what leads us, especially in early life, to create, realms of ignorance. Because, especially when you're little, it's very, very hard to reckon with things that you don't understand. And so we kind of make up things, and it's amazing throughout life to keep up the work of breaking down the things that we make up. And even, like, I think, I've been thinking about this recently, with losses that I've incurred recently. Every time somebody close to me dies, there's a big breakup of whatever mental formations I held that were related to them. And so, like, every death changes you. And it is an opportunity to see more. But it's just this constant experience of feeling formations break up and just watching it and not panicking, as Bhante said yesterday on it's not good to panic on Quizlet, and it's not good to panic in loss either if you can avoid it. But it's hard not to panic when your constructions are breaking up. But if you just watch it and let what arises naturally form, then you can then you are a wheel turner. And I forget, there is a, Bhante, what is that great term for a wheel turner? Kondrakyuta.
Ansara Chakra?
Yes, that's it. Yeah, turner of the wheel. And that's kind of an honorific term, but that's what we all strive to be. So okay, that's kind of the psychological spin. I have a few other things, of course, and then I want to go backwards. But any more thoughts about the different scales that you see this on in your life, in your day-to-day life, in your big life picture? You guys getting a little tired?
For me, it was during the discussion when you were saying, here's where the Chaitasikas come in and here's where the resultant chittas are. That really pulls all of the things we've learned together into a whole picture. So that was a very good point for me today.
Cool. Oh, I'm really glad, because I always, there's a certain amount of glazing over of the audience that always happens when it gets really technical. But I'm glad you like that, because I think what it does, to look at that, it does tie that vocabulary in, but then also it ties in the vocabulary to your experience. It gives you this linkage.
Yes, they're not just lists anymore. Now you can see how they operate and where they fit in your actions during the day and in your life. So that was great.
Sherry, you made my year. Thank you. Because that's the whole point. That's the whole point, is that, you take these fine grains and then you start putting them into the picture. And that is, when they have power. And then I really hope, like Corey, you mentioned with that dream the other time, I hope that you will then notice how that experience changes your ongoing experiences. And it really, it's really good actually to study a little bit before you sit. Not that you're going to sit there and try to take yourself, but if you just go over a list or two. And I sometimes do a khandha check when I'm sitting if I'm real distracted. It's very, very interesting, just because the khandhas, it's an easy list, and it's everything. So in conditioned experience, so you kind of find what you're missing. So I just kind of do like this global body check. Where am I in space? Like where my clothing sitting? Just like as a body in this whatever shape I'm in at the moment. What's that? And then feelings. Like what's the background feeling? Or it isn't, to me, always felt so background. It's more felt underneath. But there's usually a feeling state that I have been ignoring. Just check in with it. And then perceptions. Oh yeah. Always just like, what's it tasting like in my mouth right now? Because we always ignore that, but there are taste buds going on all the time. Really check the things you ignore. Are you smelling anything? Where are you using your sensory equipment and where are you neglecting it? So just kind of, what it does is it kind of rounds you out a little bit. And then habit formations, I kind of think, what am I filtering all this through? What am I sitting with? What big old heavy clunk of habit formation is on me right now? And it usually is amazing because it comes right to you. Like I'm all up in this or that. And then you just like, you can let it go. And then chittas, I do kind of try to say to myself, how is consciousness flowing? What is it feeling like? Is it feeling like a thin stream, or is it feeling like a big blocked up, you know, one of those rivers where they white water raft or something, you know? Is it just like, I mean, using that kind of imagery, but I do just sort of say like, you know, what, how's that feel? And then I drop it. So I don't try to stay on that as an object of meditation, but as an intervention when I'm feeling very unbalanced, I feel like it's very centering. But all of this stuff can be centering in that way. And then just like take a look at some detail and then just come into your sitting and let it permeate you to, or kind of percolate you to a richer depth. But thanks, Sherry. I'm really glad. Yeah, I think it is really cool to see it. You've got to see it in motion because it is all about motion. That's what today's all about. This wheel is like moving. And at any given moment, you know, we're experiencing 1 to 2, 2 to 3, but yet every link is happening. It's just so crazy to think. Okay, you want to roll on to another view? I can't decide which sutra should we try to fit in. All right, I just want to take a minute on the Mahanidana one because I really like this detour because I also think it gives you another use of the wheel. Okay, this is that layout of the Mahanidana Sutta. It's a really interesting sutta just to read in the commentary and everything. But what I want to point out is it also does this little branch off of craving, a causation branch. And so, you know, we're in the classical formula and all of us, you know, old age and death are dependent on birth, is dependent on existence, is dependent on clinging, is dependent on craving. And then it starts saying, but craving can be a root condition, or no, not a root condition. You will know this afternoon that I just did an error in terminology. But anyways, craving can be a condition for all these things, ending in hostilities. So all of a sudden we have this branch using the same quality of linkage to look at a different phenomena. And so
Beth, can you make it a little bigger? I think.
Oh, sure. I think I can.
You can go to Zoom.
I just have a focus thing. Oh, I got it. Sorry. Are you good?
You can make it even bigger, I guess.
Okay. You need a little more. How's that, Bante? You
Yes.
good? Okay. People okay? Okay. And I'll try to move it up so you see this part. Okay. Got it? Thank you. So what it says is craving can be a condition for pursuit. That's true. Like when you really crave something, you start going after it, right? And say pursuit leads to gain. Because if you really go after things enough and you're capable, you're going to get some of this stuff. Then gain kind of leads to decision making. You know, you're going to start evaluating and what am I going to do? And then that kind of increases your desire and lust and attachment and possessiveness. All this stuff is building and building, like your real, I guess it's back to that word we were asking about a long time ago, avarice. You know, you're really getting clinging to the stuff that your craving has brought you to. And then when you get super possessive, you get stingy. So there's your avarice. And your avarice is going up, your compassion, your bodhisattva vows are going down. Okay, so then there's a stinginess, and then you start getting really concerned with holding on to what you have gained. And then that leads to hostilities. So this is it seems to me like taking the same kind of mechanism and applying it to a different phenomenon. This could be hostilities from like, you know, a nasty face in the car to warfare. I mean, this works on every scale. And it's very useful kind of translation to me. And what I would recommend about this is making, you know, I'm kind of into like writing techniques. One great writing technique is if you end up doing something you don't like, put it at the bottom and then have an arrow and a line and an arrow and a line and an arrow and a line and an arrow and a line, and make a bunch of steps to it. And think about causation. What is the necessary condition for the thing you just did that you don't like? You know, like if I lose my temper and I get loud, what's the necessary condition for that? And what's the necessary condition for that? And just bring it up a bunch of steps. Use this kind of dependent origination logic on specific things in your life. And it is illuminating, and gives you more direction as far as trying to modify behavior. And, you know, I do think we're always need to be working from the outside in and from the inside out, you know, that kind of analytic understanding, but also like, what are the steps that would help? Where is my first intervention? Because it never works to say, well, never get, for me, and I know Francesca, you had a couple of good years there, but it doesn't work for me to say, just don't get mad. I have to undo it. I have to look at the sequence very carefully so that if I get mad, I stop it before I'm like yelling or something. So I think taking this kind of mechanism and applying it to different things is really useful. But let's also just take a backward spin, because it's worth thinking it through. Oh, I'm just going to throw in a quote too, if you don't mind, because I like this quote. This quote went with the part of this morning where we were looking at the wheel in terms of past, present, and future, and the time frames, because there are a lot of different ways to do that. I won't chop it back up, but this is just a nice quote from Bhikkhu Bodhi that I think really helps with time in the wheel. Each transient entity emerging into the present out of the stream of events bearing down from the past absorbs into itself the causal influx of the past to which it must be responsive. During its phase of presence, it exercises its own distinctive function with the support of its conditions, expressing thereby its own immediacy of being. And then with the completion of its actuality, it is swept away by the universal impermanence to become itself a condition determinant of the future. It's like that contextualizing of time, you know, we're just in this thing. And I like also talking about each transient entity, not talking about me and you and all that, but just everything that happens has to be looking at its causes and has to be aware of its causes that it's producing. But it's put much more elegantly. But let's look at the wheel backwards. Okay. As Bhante chanted, it was so beautiful, the undoing. To stop this, stop that. To stop this, stop that. So it does spin both ways. Just to hear it, to stop old age and death, stop birth. So stop making things. To stop birth, stop existence. I'm just going to say, this is all real easy to say. None of it's easy to do. But anyways, to stop birth, stop existence, stop wanting things to be the same, stop craving continuity. To stop existence, stop clinging, let go of tension, let go of that, clutch. To stop clinging, stop craving, let go of wanting and urgency and vision and manipulation. To stop craving, stop feeling, let go of reactivity. To stop feeling, stop contact. Let go of interaction sometimes. You can't let go of that really, but that's just the idea. To stop contact, stop sense spaces. This would say, let go of experiencing. You know, you're not going to really do this, but just this is the link. To stop sense spaces, stop namarupa, let go of self. To stop namarupa, stop consciousness. I could not translate this, let go of consciousness. To stop consciousness, stop formations. Again, let go of making things. To stop formations, stop ignorance. Open eyes and self up to what you're experiencing. So that's my little backwards wheel, but I have another, there's the other sutta that I mentioned is the Upanisa Sutta, which is translated as this transcendental dependent arising. That's a pretty good title. And this, there's a lot in this sutta, but one of the things it does is an unusual backwards flip on this whole thing. So I'm going to give you again one of those summary arrow things from this sutta. Okay, let me zoom it up a little again.
Thank you.
Is it okay? I'm gonna just do the bottom, and then when we're on the top, I'll make it bigger. This is a really interesting sutta, and it goes through the wheel backwards. So I just put ... there, you know. So we're going from the bottom, and we go through all our steps from ignorance to birth. And then instead of saying old age and death, it says suffering. It just does a translation there. And suffering is the leaping off point. The reason it's such an interesting translation is because it pivots the experience into a leaping off point instead of a stopping point or a repeating point. And all of these things Bhante is going to talk about a ton in the last weekend. And they're very, very vividly laid out in the Visuddhimagga and many other things, I'm sure. But what it talks about is instead of saying, you know, old age and death just get you back right into the circle, it says it can lead to faith. Now, this is that juncture that we talked about at some point in the last classes, and I can't remember, where the Buddha says, stress sometimes leads people to question and sometimes leads people to, I think, something like tension. I forget what the other exact quote was. Oh, search or bewilderment. That was it. So there is your moment. Is it going to be bewilderment or search? Just like the Buddha said. If it's bewilderment, you go into ignorance, you go right back. To go, do not pass, you know, go back to jail, don't pass go or collect $200. Yeah, that's what happens if it leads to bewilderment, but sometimes it leads to search. And in the commentary, there's a nice quote about this. This is Bhikkhu Bodhi again. Yet for suffering to become an effective spur to spiritual awakening, it is not enough to merely encounter it. Because if that were the case, everybody would be awake, right? Because we're all encountering suffering all the time. But you have to take it on and see it as internal. And why do some people do that? You know, this, I believe, is the result of karma from prior lives. I really do. When I was, you know, early as a therapist, long ago, I was like, why do some people come in my office? I couldn't get it. You know, it wasn't about, you know, because they had a specific helper that kind of taught them something. It wasn't because they had a certain skill or drive in particular. A lot of people came in my office and said, I'm not the person in my family that really needs to be sitting here. And I totally agree. But they are the person that was sitting there because their suffering led to search. So the good fortune of being human is that we have this suffering and that some of us have so much good karma to start searching with it. It's just such the critical, beautiful pivot moment. So from there, this is the steps of purification that we'll learn more about later, but you'll recognize some of it. The faith is a condition for joy, which is a condition for rapture, which is a condition for tranquility, which is a condition for happiness, which is a condition for concentration. Now there you should be recognizing some of your chaitasikas from the jhana states. That the more active things, the rapture, gives way to the tranquility. And then you're seeing that fact of concentration is not for its own sake. It is for the knowledge and vision of things as they are, which is also not for its own sake. It's to move you past it into disenchantment, dispassion, emancipation, and destruction of the cankers, which is from truly, truly knowing impermanence of the khandhas. And by knowing, I don't just mean like knowing, which we all know. I mean like knowing. So that kind of goes back to when we were looking at the Mahaprajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra that starts out with Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva saw that all 5 skandhas were empty and was released and released everyone from all suffering. So that's like the release from suffering point through all these steps. But it's an interesting look at another way that that just the idea of linkage is applied towards liberation. And it's kind of beautiful. But I love that suffering point there, because that's just sort of everything. So are there any questions on that or thoughts about experiences that you've had where you kind of noticed yourself spinning the wheel backwards? Experiences where you noticed that you let go of something. Now it's not as, to use the word subtle again, it's more subtle to let go of something than to smash something. So we often don't notice. And in therapy, when people get better, a lot of times they don't actually notice. And I have to say, you haven't done that in a really long time, or you haven't said that in a really long time. Because you kind of don't notice when it drops out. But that is such a progress thing when things that are problematic drop out. So I'm wondering if any of you have any experiences on any scale that resonate with that idea.
I do all the time. I'm trying to figure out how to word it without being overly sharing at the moment.
Just what you're comfortable with, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, since this class has started, I've noticed a lot of experiences. Right now, things that would normally trigger me, I see that they trigger me, and I might do 1 or 2 of my normal habitual things that I would normally do, but instead of like carrying it on or holding a grudge for long periods of time, it's like, what is this doing? This isn't helping things. Like, I'm realizing the actions that I'm doing are not beneficial, and I'll reel them in. And there's times where I figure out the trigger or the cause, and like remove that from the situation or remove that from the equation would be a better way of putting it. So yeah, especially since this class has started, I'm seeing the process and I'm able to reel it back.
That's fantastic. I mean, that is exactly it. Like you see those linkages earlier. That's exactly it. That's so, I mean, that's just like, I can't even say like, I mean, that's like everything right there. If you can do that, you are molding your life and your consciousness into a whole nother thing.
Yeah, the fears that I have, because a lot of it's rewiring or creating new pathways, the fears that I'm finding myself falling into, and I'm not trying to turn this into a therapy session, but it's like, how hardwired are these things? And how hard are these things going to be to change? I know a lot of the things that you redo, it's going to follow the same neural pathway, but instead of like just skipping over the frontal cortex, you force it to go a little bit further in so that you kind of get some more cognitive function out of it, if you will. But yeah, it's interesting because as long as you can slow down and be mindful, you can see the process. And there's a lot that you're not seeing, but you can start seeing harder steps that everything takes.
Right. No, I really appreciate you saying it, because that is exactly how it works. You know, you see the process in more detail. You've kind of, I mean, on one level, that's kind of mechanistic, you could say, but I think it's very real. You are rewiring. You are putting some of that emotional associative material, you know, you're kind of connecting it with the more thoughtful parts of you, prefrontal. And by putting all these thoughts in, we're like repaving the road there, you know, by putting all these thoughts in about how the process works that we do in this class. So if this class is influencing you in that way, then, you know, again, you've made my year, because everything, this is what we're all trying to do as a Sangha together, is talk about things in a way that breaks it open, that moves it. And that's exactly it. But, you know, I think that everything varies. You know, one thing I do with writing exercises, sometimes I call it from breakfast to cosmic, is list take something that's happening and list every cause and condition you can think of for it in your life. You need to have some time to do this, because I'm saying from breakfast to cosmic, because it's like, you know, what you ate in the morning is affecting you, the weather's affecting you, you know, how you're doing physically is affecting you, the season, you know, the holidays, all that's affecting us. But then there's also, you know, the bigger and bigger things. We're affected by the socio-political environment. We're affected by technology. Which just popped up a dumb thing that I got to get rid of. Yeah, I mean, we're just affected by so many things. And if you just start building and building and building and looking at that, you're awestruck by the complexity of it. But what you're saying is that, you know, there are different levels that these causations have holds of us. You know, so some of us have, you know, some wiring that is really intense, you know, people who have chronic mental illnesses, you know, they have some wiring that is going to limit the amount of adaptivity they can develop. It's just, that's a factor that's in everything. And then some people have, you know, really profound experiences in early life that are good or bad, that will put parameters on things. Or, you know, there's so many things. So every cause, and this is what we're basically going to talk about this afternoon, is every mode of causation also has a range of intensity. So when you make your list from cosmic to breakfast or breakfast to cosmic, you know, some of them are really big. If you're sick today and you don't feel well, that's a big factor. But if you're doing okay physically, you know, my bodily state is not a huge factor today. I'm thankful. And every day I try to remember to be thankful if it's not. You know, so it's just, there's all this variance that we have to work with. And it comes back to like the idea of just understanding the pieces first. And then, as Sherry said, the system of how all the pieces interact. And then you have more of a handle on what's going on and what you can do. For sure. I mean, I think, does somebody else have something? Because I can talk on and I don't want to if somebody has something. Okay, well, what I was thinking is that the whole point of causation to the path is that, you know, you kind of understand how to participate in the path and not manipulate it or seek something. But if you change your questions from why is this happening to what is moving right now with what and how is it happening, not like the why, it gives you just so much more leverage. And, you know, and therapy is a very why practice. And that is part of why I think that I broke out of just like my therapy worldview to needing the Buddhist worldview, because it's very why. And it's useful. And like that Dogen quote is, you know, you need to know something about why. But when you start asking more like, well, okay, just what's moving? How is it moving? How do I want to move? How can I make a course correction? Then I think you get a lot more both impact and ease in moving through things. And, you know, and again, emptiness is just taken for granted here. We're not stopping and saying emptiness, emptiness, emptiness. But the point we're making is that this is all emptiness. This is all meeting and motion. And, you know, it's really, really important just to state that and remember it. But the universe is self-regulating and impersonal, and we are in it. And Toshita's nodding. Yes, it is. And it's just staggering to realize that. But this gives us tools for kind of looking at those realities and still feeling like we have impact within it, and you know, we can develop things that actually bring us a sense of ease and joy and not just problem solving, you know, so much. So that is kind of my wrap up for the 12 links of interdependent origination. Anybody else have any thoughts, or Bhante have anything you would like to say before break? And then we go to the 24, which is a whole nother layer this afternoon.
I have a thought if I have some time.
Yeah.
So I always, so this is based on something I read recently as well. All material forms, we can see that eventually they decay and they die or disappear. And I've been reading about, I've been looking for the answer. So what exactly is nirvana? I mean, it's described everywhere. Everyone is trying to get nirvana. So what exactly is nirvana? So recently I found a book while I was reading. It describes that all material forms end, but the mental formations, until you reach nirvana, does not end, which made me realize all we are trying to do is stop that continuation. The connection I see from that to 12 dependent origination is bhava, depending on the way you go around the cycle, that would be the last one, existence. It is our existence that makes the next existence, or it is our craving that causes the existence to become again. I'm not talking about me wanting to born as rich as, I don't know, Jeff Bezos is next time. That's not what I'm talking about. This is very subtle level of craving that causes us to keep the mental cycle. I don't know the English term. That's the problem. Chitta parampara. Hamudro, maybe you can help me. A genesis of Chaitasikas, I guess, some sort of a lineation.
Is that a stream of consciousness?
Stream of consciousness. There we go. Thank you. So to me, it seems like this whole point about nirvana is to stop that stream of consciousness. And easy to say, very hard to do.
Yes. And well, Corey was kind of talking about stopping in a certain way, but Bhante, yeah, I mean, we were talking about, he will talk about Nibbana more later, but do you want to address that a little bit now? Because that's such a very profound point and question.
Okay. Yes, we couldn't discuss much about that. And of course, I mean, almost we couldn't touch about that. Two things here, like avijja, or the ignorance. Why, although it is a circle, we always go to avijja first. You know, we start with that somehow. You know, we can really find the beginning or the end, but we start with avijja. It shows that how important it is to talk about avijja. You know, the three wholesome roots and three unwholesome roots are there. Out of them, three unwholesome roots starts with lobha, dosa, and moha. So lobha is very visible. It's very easy to see when someone is lobha, greedy. You know, when you are greedy, you can recognize it. And when you are angry also, you can recognize it. But it is very difficult, almost impossible. Like when you are ignorant, you don't know how foolish you become, how tricked you become when you are in ignorant mode. And all those, rich people, educated people, all kinds of people who have accomplished many things, they have been so much carried away, a very heavy baggage with ignorance. Even the practitioners, including. So they might even think, oh, I have attained this thing, I have meditated so much, and so I'm like in a different level. So this ignorant thing can be the most tricky part. We have to be really careful about. So Buddha said there are three massive structures. I don't know if I said that before. One thing is the great ocean. The other thing is the great earth. And then the other thing is the great mountain. Those three things are so massive, and but they will still be gone one day. It will take maybe eons, we don't know. Many thousands of years. After that, it will be gone. But remember, still, the ignorance will take us through the samsara. That is so tricky. So we have to be really careful about that. Like, let's say, like you are a big celebrity figure, you don't know how foolish you become when everyone praises you, right? And oh, he's so good, he's so educated, he's so wonderful, and all these things really fool you, right? You come back to the samsara, and that is why like practicing alone can really be helpful, as everyone was talking about here. Practicing, you need a break. You really need a break. I like Dr. Beth taking breaks all the time. It really gives us a chance to reflect. So in Buddhist calendar we have something called full moon. The full moon, when the moon is full, people also have different mentality, attitude changes. So it's important you practice something. So in our Buddhist calendar, for example, in Sri Lanka, full moon day is a public, bank and mercantile holiday. Everyone has an opportunity to go to the temple and practice. They practice 8 sila, 8 precepts, and that's a great opportunity. And also the old people mostly go to the temple. Young people think they have more time to practice. You don't know, like when the death comes, young and old, it doesn't matter. But still, somehow we are being fooled, and it's important that we practice. Yeah, we take a break in between, and even once a month, if we practice, one whole day, cut off from the rest of the world, practice yourself, will be really helpful. And in Buddhist calendar also, we have actually 4 times a month, you can do that, or once a month you can do that. And once in a while also go for a 10 days retreat, maybe once a year, maybe once in 6 months, and that will give you so much energy. You will get back to those refreshing moments of your own good consciousness. Come back to that real good yourself. I think it's very important. Otherwise, we have the eyes, we look at the world, we get lost. We see so many things, and we open our mouth, we keep talking, we forget ourselves, and so we have to shut this and then look into ourselves and talk to ourselves. That will give you so much time and space for yourself. And most of us do not have that.
Yes. I worked in the ER for a while, and if you want to believe in full moons, work in the ER, because what happens every month is so wild. But that's really, really helpful. Coming back to assuming ignorance and coming back to solitude. You do have to have time to just let everything filter through your body and your heart and your mind. Okay, speaking of that, we got a bunch of time coming up now to do that. So are you all ready for a break? Drink water too. I firmly believe in that. I know a lot of you stay hydrated in class, but make sure you do. And yeah, have good refreshment, and we'll be back and we'll look at the 24 modes of conditionality this afternoon. And you all be well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all.